Hello, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine with Pick and Pay and another week of wine uncertainty. Now, by the time you watch this, we might just be able to buy some wine on the internet, but if not, we'll be reduced to what so many people are doing, opening that bottle of 1963 graduation wine that you'd normally be using to remove paint from a wall or stains from a particularly old sink, and instead doing your best to choke it down. But we do look forward to better times. And to do so, I have a relentless optimist joining me on the show. He's also an expert on dealing with change and dealing with challenges and dealing with large bottles of wine. He's very, very good at that. He also happens to be a director on Dan Really Likes Wine. Hello, Michael Jordaan.
Hello, Dan. Thank you very much for having me. And I think you neglected to point out what a junior director I am and how honored I am to be such a junior director on your show.
Well, I'm just honored to have you on the show because it's taken almost 3 weeks of sending email applications to Rose Jordaan, the managing director, CEO, and Empress for Life at Bartinney, to get permission. So, Rose, thank you very, very much indeed for freeing up Michael from washing the dishes for half an hour.
I also appreciate it, Dan. Let's get to the wine.
Well, let's indeed, because I've made a mistake. You're a great example of learning from mistakes, learning from things you've got wrong, and coming back a stronger and better person. I've done a few of these interviews where I've begun with a really deep and meaningful question about the greater impact of wine on our lives and the philosophy inherent therein. And 17 minutes later, I'm still listening to a very good answer, but without a glass of wine in hand. So let's get the important stuff done first. We have a bottle of wine to share. We've got one of them each. This is the 2014 Bartinney Cabernet Sauvignon. And this, I would venture, is pretty much your flagship down at Bartinney.
Yes, it is, Dan. We have about 2/3 of our production in Cabernet and then a third in Chardonnay. And we're very proud of the Cabernet, which now has won 5 stars in Platter on a number of successive years, the 14 and the 15. Interestingly, the 14 and the 15 are very different from each other. Rose likes to call this one the feminine one. And the reason why she calls it feminine is it has no obvious faults. It's very multi-layered and it's very complex and it's got very soft tannins. And interestingly, our 2015 is the opposite. It's also a very noble Cabernet, but it's bold and it's fruity and it's wow and kind of announces its presence, which just shows what a variety you can get out of the single varietal. Cheers.
Yeah. Also, cheers, Michael. A terrific illustration of how it's not just the terroir, but it's the weather and the rainfall and when you pick it and all manner of other aspects that play into a wine. And that's something you would have learnt over the last number of years since you've been at Bartinney, a property that's got a wonderful story to it. I think it'll be the best story we'll hear from you today. There's such a romance to it. You decided to move the family down to the Cape. You had a piece of land in mind. There was a family connection, but it looked like it was going to head the way of a gentleman called Herman Kutzer. And he, at the last minute, was able to get on the phone, turn things around, and make, at the risk of sounding a little melodramatic, make Michael's dream come true.
Dan, I must remember not to tell you stories thinking you'll forget them, because much wine has flowed, between us since I told you that story, but it's true. I very badly wanted to buy back the farm, which had belonged to my grandfather and my father, but had subsequently been sold. And when I got onto the scene, it was quite late already because Herman Kutzer had actually negotiated the deal and was on his way to signing to buy the farm. But he was kind enough to just listen to my story, looked me in the eye and said, "This farm is not meant to be mine, it's meant to be yours." Didn't conclude the deal. I still had to negotiate very hard for another year and eventually bought the farm. At a price that didn't make any economic sense. But for me, it was the passion, it was the family home. My grandfather was here, my father, me, and now our 3 daughters. So hopefully it's the 4th generation will also take to the farm that we did. But yes, it was all thanks to the gracious gesture of somebody who realized what this farm meant to me.
And of course, now the man behind Mirandal out in Durbanville, where he's making some very fun wine and some very cool wine and a great history there as well. It allowed you to settle in initially between Joburg and Stellenbosch and now more permanently down in Stellenbosch to this new life as a wine owner. Generally, running a wine business of any sort makes absolutely no financial sense, but it is enormously good fun. uh, at what point are you able to draw a line between Bartinney the business and Bartinney the indulgence?
You know, it's a line that GT Ferrero, who was once the chairman of First Rand, also mentioned to me. And I always thought he was just making a joke. He said, you swap ROE for ROE. In the banking world, we speak about return on equity. It's maybe the guiding thing in the financial world. But he says, once you're in wine farming, it's return on ego. You know, you replace the equity with the ego. But I think it's not just really ego. It is the fact that you can be part of nature, that you can get rid of alien vegetation and replant fynbos, that you can go for walks or mountain bike rides, that you can share something physical with your kids, that you have a product, something that you can smell and touch, and you can share it with your mates the way you never could when you produce something as ethereal as you did in banking. So for me, I've made that jump completely, and I do get great joy out of living in a beautiful part of our country and producing something of excellence, which is something that we in South Africa can do and can showcase to the world.
What was Michael Jordaan, the wine aficionado's level of understanding and appreciation of wine pre-Bartinney versus where you find yourself today?
Damn, that's a really deep question. I'll tell you why. Is the older I get and the more I know, the more I know how little I know. That is the case for everything in life, and it certainly is the case for wine. There was a time where, you know, I could give you all the buzzwords and explain the different varietals and where they are in the world. But really, if you see how broad the world of wine is, then you realize your little knowledge is really nothing. And the nice thing about that is I now drink my wine for enjoyment. You know, I don't try and impress anyone. I don't try and drink what other people necessarily say I should be drinking. I drink wine because it's a wonderful part of life. And I don't care to call myself just an enthusiastic amateur in the world of wine.
You have a great source of wine to be able to draw from, and as we're seeing today, this is delightful, and we'll analyze it in just a moment. But you're also in a broader wine area that's fantastic. You're in a wine country that is incredible. How much time do you spend exploring wine beyond just Bartinney and sampling wine from other parts of Stellenbosch, other parts of South Africa?
Well, currently in the lockdown, you know, we don't have a chance to get out at all, but it's been one of those times which has rewarded a form of saving, which is building up a cellar over a period of time, which again is something I would advise anyone who's in a position to do, is to get yourself a cellar, and when at every good opportunity, buy a bottle or six and put it down in the cellar, because it's during times like these that you get to really use and enjoy them. So while it's been a tough time for wine sales, I mean, they're effectively zero. One of the advantages we have is that, you know, we can obviously enjoy a lot of our own wine, but believe it or not, the palate actually wants to explore more than that. And then that's when it's great that you've built up a cellar. So I'm really enjoying wines right now from over the ages, over the years, different types of varietals, discovering new things that I forgot I even had. And it's been one of those privileges to actually have a good cellar. Every gentleman, every family, try and build up a wine cellar.
Through all of the wine that you've been drinking now, Michael, sampling that collection, the cellar that you've built up, it will have reminded you, if you needed any reminder, of the depth and the quality we have here in South African wine. Is it too romantic of me to believe that South African wine has got a meaningful role to play once the doors of the economy start creaking open and we start trying to get our feet back on the ground, that the wine will play a big role in that economic resurgence?
Dan, I am quite worried about the industry when this lockdown ends. It's a high-cost industry with low profit margins, and any business that isn't allowed to sell its product for a couple of weeks or a couple of months while having to support the labor force is under extreme duress. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be good wineries coming out of this or strong wineries, but it'll typically be the ones that have a lot of capital or put a little bit of cash aside. But that wasn't always possible if you don't run a profitable wine business. So my plea out there is just to support South African wines, you know, when you can. There are actually some capabilities to buy some of the wines now that will be delivered after the lockdown starts. Do that to support the South African wine industry, but I'm sure you'll also find it pretty rewarding to have some of those wines to drink after lockdown or in later years when we reflect back on 2020.
Yeah, I think 2020 might be a vintage. Supposedly, it's going to be a great one, but it'll be remembered for many reasons more than just the quality of the wine. The wine that you do have, we know the Bartinney is sensational. In terms of the other wine that you have been drinking, the other wine that you've encountered in that wine drinking career of yours, are there other particular estates, grapes, wines that you always look out for that you remember with particular fondness?
Dan, one of the disadvantages of being on a wine farm is that there's always a lot of availability of your own wines, and you probably drink too much of that. But I do think that the entire South African wine industry has done incredibly well over the last few years, has lifted its game, is up there with the best in the world. Where we lack is probably in terms of image, but it's not in substance. Our substance is up there that in blind tasting, we compare with the best of the new world and actually even in the best of the old world. So my message out there to the world is don't just buy on image, buy the wines that you really like. In any event, drink the wines that you like, not the ones that other people tell you to buy. And South Africa is really, really good value for money. And with that, I'm not saying it's bad quality. I'm saying it's actually great quality at an affordable price. So please drink more South African wine.
And let's do exactly that. Let's talk about this before we wrap up. Your 2014 Bartinney Cab Sav. We've mentioned it a little in terms of it being a very distinctive year. We've also had a look at the fact that it's got 5 stars from Mr. Platter. I know Rose Bartinney has this for breakfast most mornings and thoroughly enjoys it. Your Banhook Valley, it just seems to be an area. Your Chardonnay's lovely. You've won some great awards for it, but it's just something special about the Cabernet Sauvignon you're able to create from your little corner of paradise.
Thanks for that, Dan. Yes, of course, terroir, the area, the weather plays a very large role. Sometimes we give that to less of a prominent place in the winemaking and focus too much on the winemaker or the winemaking process in itself. In the end, it's nature that makes the wine. But then, of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of decisions, some of them science, many of them art, that actually express themselves in the wine ultimately. And that's how every year you get a little bit and a little bit better. It's a long process. It's the same process that you have in business, but you just keep on making the right decisions. And ultimately, this is your reward. So cheers, Dan.
Cheers, Michael. And I have to say, and I know we've said it a number of times, I've mentioned it many times on this show, that I do owe the existence of Dan Really Likes Wine to you after you bullied me into getting it up and running, after accosting me through your 3rd bottle of lightly wooded Chardonnay at a Cape Epic wine tasting evening and demanding that I start a wine show and then phoning me every day until I did. And I'm very grateful for that pressure that you exacted. But we've also had some wonderful times. And I think you and I collectively are a brilliant, brilliant example to the greater business world of how to run a board meeting. Because every board meeting we've ever had has never had minutes, there've never been notes, there've been several bottles of wine, a fantastic dinner, and neither of us can ever remember exactly what we decided on the next day.
Long live those board meetings, and that is how they should be held. There shouldn't be boardroom strife. And really, I'm so grateful that your business is doing so well and that you get more and more viewers who experience the quality and the humor and the authenticity of drinking wine as I discover it through you, Dan.
Oh, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the time as always. And I cannot wait till I'm sitting on that lawn of Bartinney with a glass in hand as we discuss very, very important aspects of the Dan Really Likes Wine business, like whether we should go to Spain or Italy next on an important research trip. But in the interim, enjoy the Bartinney, enjoy the rest of the cellar that you have there, whatever Lady Bartinney allows you to have when she's gone through her first choice. And yeah, counting down to that next glass together, Michael.
Cheers. Life's too short to drink bad wine.
It is indeed. Sage advice, as always, from the junior director of Dan Really Likes Wine, great friend of mine, great friend of South African wine and business, and a man with a permanent smile on his face, as would you if you owned a large wine estate and were married to a former Victoria's Secrets angel. So Michael Jordaan, our special guest on Dan Really Likes Wine this week with Pick and Pay. Start having a look online, seeing what's available, and as soon as we can, we'll get buying and continue to enjoy fantastic South African wine. I'll see you next week. Cheers.